In this video, I'm making a beautiful mosaic Damascus buoy with 24 karat gold inlay in the fittings. You're about to see this whole project from start to finish, so sit back and enjoy this epic build. The first thing I need to make for this buoy is the mosaic Damascus pattern. I begin with my favorite Damascus steel combination of 1084 and 15N20 steels. This combination will give a beautiful high contrast pattern in the end knife.
We're probably up to about 2,300 degrees. I'm gonna pull this bad boy out. It barely fits in the door and get it forge welded together in the press. Be nice and quick. You gotta strike while the metal's hot, or slowly press while the metal's hot, rather. Now time to re-square the billet to get the pattern to go across on a 45-degree angle. So to do that, we take our nice square billet and we put it on a 45-degree angle and re-square it by smashing the corners in. See, we're kind of forming a square again, only now the square is formed from the previous square's corners.
Now that the bar is 1 inch square and the pattern goes across on a 45-degree angle, I want to cut the bar up into 4 equal length pieces. We're then going to stack them up a little bit different than before. We're going to do something called a 4-way, where we stack 2 on top of each other, another 2 on top of each other, and put those 2 next to each other. And that will form a 4-way mosaic Damascus kind of picture on the end of the bar.
At this point, our mosaic Damascus billet is virtually done. The only problem is the pattern is only on the end of the billet. So we've got to cut this thing up into tiles and tile weld all those little pieces together to transform the pattern from the end of the billet to the sides of our blade. And that's what we're gonna be working on now. Wow! Oh, I love it! Woohoo! Look at that! Came out amazing! That is gnarly, dude. Here's a sneak peek at the pattern on the end of our mosaic bar. I think it looks absolutely crazy. I love it. It's kind of got a big flamey X thing in the middle. We've got some like mushrooms or something going on here on the sides. I think this is gonna look absolutely killer cool. In order to get the pattern on the end of our billet onto the sides of the blade, we're gonna cut it up into a bunch of tiles on a 35-degree angle. So I've got 7 tiles laid out here. I've got them CA glued down to a 2x4, which is something different. I haven't tried this before. I normally tack weld the billet onto a bar of steel and cut it. This time I thought I'd try CA gluing it to the 2x4 so we can cut up all these tiles on the bandsaw and clean them up, get them laid out and ready to forge weld together later. Got the entire billet all cut up into 35-degree tiles. Let's go through the process of flipping these all over so we can get the pattern on the sides of our blade instead of just on the end of the bar. What we're gonna do is flip these in a way that each piece mirrors the next piece after it. So we want this edge to connect with this edge of that tile. And now we want this top edge of this one to connect with the top edge of the next tile. And we can just kind of flatten these out a little bit, just like that. And that's how we want the pattern to mirror itself all the way through. We flip it over like this. All these Sharpie lines on here represent the mosaic pattern on the end of the billet, and it's now on the side of the billet once all this stuff's forge welded together. Got all the tiles welded to a piece of sheet metal and then sandwiched it on the other side with a piece of sheet metal, sealed up all the seams completely so we can do 0 atmosphere forge welding. I'm gonna pop this in the forge, heat it up real hot, smash and forge weld all the tiles together, draw this out, grind some of that sheet metal and stuff off, and turn this into a knife blade. I got our massive 14-inch blade forged out. It's looking really nice. I tried to leave the blade extra thick as well because there's still a little bit of that sheet metal left over on the sides of the blade. I haven't ground that off yet. Most of it's probably gone though because it naturally fell off as forge scale as I was forging the blade, so we don't have to worry about it too much. Next thing I'm gonna do is grind the scale off with the angle grinder and then get this blade surface ground. After that, I can finalize the profile of the blade. I'm pretty much done surface grinding the blade for now. I want to see how the pattern looks, so I sanded on it with the Broadbeck up to 320 real quick, just with a round wheel. I'm gonna stick it in some ferric chloride and take a look. All right, let's see how this pattern looks. Whoa, awesome. Oh, it looks super cool. I love it. I love it. Oh, look at that. Oh, it's so cool how you can just do subtle little changes at the very beginning of the pattern and it changes it in the end so much. Wow, I love it.
Since the pattern looks good, I can move on by finishing up the profile of the blade. I did a little bit of the profiling while forging, but I want to clean it up and continue refining it with the grinders and bandsaw. I like to forge the tip shape about halfway and then grind and cut off the other half of the material in order to not distort the pattern more than what I'm looking for.
I just finished profiling the blade. I decided to make the clip come back about an inch further than I had on my sketch, and I'm really liking the looks of that quite a bit. The next thing I'm gonna do is grind in the blade bevels. I'm I'm gonna leave a nice little bit of extra material up here at the spine though, because we still have to heat treat this blade and I don't like to do too much of the grinding beforehand. I'm gonna grind in the main bevels though and hog off some of that extra material we don't need on there for the heat treatment. If I left all the material on the edge of the blade, we'd have to just needlessly grind all that extra material off after it's hardened. The reason I don't forge in the blade bevels on a mosaic Damascus blade is because I don't want to distort the pattern anymore. That's why I grind in those blade bevels on this type of Damascus. I got the bevels roughed in and I put a 120 grit finish on them to reduce the chance of it cracking when we heat treat. I'm gonna pop it in the heat treating oven at 1525 degrees. Bring it up to temperature, let it soak for a couple of minutes, and then we'll quench it in some 100-degree Parks 50. Woo, it's hot in there. The blade's been soaking at 1525 for about 10 or 12 minutes now. I'm gonna pop it out and get it hardened. Not a lot of room to move it up and down. I probably should have poured a little bit more Parks 50 in here. I did bang the tip into the bottom of the tank too, which isn't ideal. Oh, that pattern. You can really start to see that pattern. Looks like it didn't warp too bad. It looks pretty straight. Let's run a file over it and see if it got hard. The end of the tang should be a little bit softer and the file should start to cut in there. You know the big difference in the sound? Big difference in the sound. Soft. Hard. The heat treatment looks like it was really successful. I'm gonna get this thing in the oven to temper as soon as the oven cools down. I'm gonna temper it for like 2 hours at probably about 425 degrees, and that's gonna take away some of the brittleness, make it a tiny bit softer, but a lot tougher. Right now it's so hard that if I dropped it or even just sitting here naturally on its own, it could crack and break. So that's why we wanna get it tempered as soon as possible. I just got the blade out of the oven. It tempered pretty much overnight. I ran it through 2 2-hour cycles and let the oven cool down in between. I'm gonna be grinding on this blade pretty much all day, starting with surface grinding. I'm gonna get all these flat parallel surfaces cleaned up and then move on to doing the bevels and straightening and stuff. To start though, let's go surface grind these flats.
After surface grinding the blade, I noticed there's some warpage and I want to go ahead and straighten it right now. To straighten the blade, I heat it up with a torch near the spine of the blade, kind of to a straw or maybe a little bit of a purplish color. Then I pull the blade in the opposite direction that it's warped in and cool it off with some water. Sometimes after one or maybe many attempts, I'll get the blade perfectly straight before we move on to more grinding. Now that the blade's straight, I'm gonna finish grinding in the bevels of the blade and then move on to getting the rough hand sanding done on the blade bevels. Next up, it's time to grind the clip in. I'm gonna use a work rest set up on a really long angle to get the clip ground in accurately on both sides, and then move on to hand sanding the clip.
The blade bevels and clip are hand sanded to 600 grit. I've been grinding on the tang. I've kind of prepped that for the guard. Before we can actually fit the guard, I need to get my maker's mark etched onto the side of the ricasso so I can finish sand the ricasso and then we can do the guard fit.
Early on in my knife making, I used to stamp my maker's mark onto the ricasso, but I had to do it when the ricasso was soft and before the blade was hardened, and it added a lot of complications. So for many years now, I've been electrochemically etching my maker's mark onto the ricasso. To electrochemically etch, I lay a stencil on the ricasso with my maker's mark cut out in it, and then I use a little bit of low voltage DC current, an electrode, and some electrolyte to etch away at the steel. It takes a couple of minutes and I get a nice deep maker's mark. In the future, I'm hoping to experiment by getting a CNC laser and seeing how I like using that to make my maker's mark and to do some other fun things that I have in mind too. For now, I'm done working on the blade and it's time to move on to the handle and fittings. First up, I want to work on the guard by twisting up a portion of our mosaic Damascus pattern. I'm going to twist it super tight until it looks like all thread.
Twisting this little short bar for the fittings is kind of awkward, so we're gonna do a ring around the rosy style with Dad on the next go. Go, 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 go. Okay. Whoa. I actually feel kind of dizzy. Thank you. That was a lot more fun than normal. Ring around the rosy with Dad for the win.
Now that the mosaic is twisted up nice and tight, I'm going to start forging out the guard shape. I need to forge it into a flat bar and then forge the ends of the guard to have a nice little curve to them.
I've ground some of the scale off and everything, and now I want to start milling in some flat spots so I can easily clamp this up in different directions in the milling machine. Our guard's now got flat parallel surfaces so we can easily clamp it in the vise. And the next step is to start milling out the slot for the tang so we can fit the guard to the blade.
The slot's milled all the way through the guard, and now I'm milling a little bit of relief where the ricasso is going to touch the guard. I hammer the guard onto the blade with a special punch. Since the ricasso is left an outline, I can follow that outline with a high-speed dental burr and slowly remove material and keep hammering the guard onto the blade until the ricasso is actually set into the guard about 10 to 15 thousandths of an inch. After a few cycles of hammering the guard on and removing material with the high-speed dental burr, this is how the finished guard fit looks. The next thing to make is the pommel nut. It's going to be made from some of the same twist mosaic Damascus pattern. The pommel nut will hold the handle assembly together onto the blade. The tang will go all the way through the handle and thread onto the pommel nut and cinch everything together. After drilling and threading the pommel nut, I can chuck it up in the lathe and begin turning it down to size. You can actually see quite a bit of deflection on the pommel nut as I turn it down on the lathe. The pommel nut is chucked up in the lathe with a 1032 bolt, which isn't super thick, and since this is Damascus steel, even though it's not hardened, it's still harder than mild steel, so as I work it, it's deflecting and moving around. I only rough in the shape using the lathe cutters. Once it's roughed in, I then move on to files and the Dremel tool to fine tune and refine the shape of the pommel nut.
I finished making the pommel nut, so it's time to start fitting the handle.
The handle for this buoy is fossilized walrus ivory, and I've glued a piece of wood to each side of the handle material. That's because the walrus ivory is a weird, inconsistent oval shape, and I want to be able to easily clamp it up in the milling machine. So I glue the wood to the sides of the handle and shape the wood down until it centers the handle material in between the two pieces of wood. That way, when I clamp it up in my milling machine, it'll go to the exact same location when I drill from one end of the handle or flip it over and work on the other end of the handle, or take it out and put it back in the milling machine. Once I'm done drilling all the holes going through the handle for the tang, I can begin widening out the slot a little bit and making it so the tang fits better using some broaches. Once the handle fits up to the blade, I add the pommel and pommel nut. We can assemble the knife for the first time, even though the fittings aren't all shaped yet. I do a bunch of shaping on the handle and fittings, but it's mostly hours of me standing at the grinder, slowly removing little bits of material until things look the way I want them. So we'll go ahead and cut right to the fun stuff, the 24 karat gold wire inlay on the fittings. To inlay gold in my fittings, I engrave a groove for the gold, then dovetail that gold, and then smash the soft 24 karat gold into place. And the gold is soft enough that it'll fill in the dovetail, mechanically holding it in place. After that, all I need to do is clean up the surface with a little bit of hand sanding.
Today I finished up the 24 karat gold inlay on the fittings and started doing some hand sanding. I've got most of the guard up to 600 grit and 320 grit on the pommel and front spacer. I've also started hand sanding the handle. I've got it up to 600 grit, and it is now officially time to get this handle bedded in epoxy. I've covered all the pieces that we don't want the epoxy to stick to in Vaseline. And I also put a piece of tape on the pommel so I can fill up this end of the handle material with epoxy. For the epoxy, I'm gonna use some really high quality G-Flex West System epoxy. This stuff will take quite a while to cure, but I like slow curing stuff because it normally comes out a little bit stronger and lasts longer, and it also gives me more time to clean it up. Got the epoxy mixed up really well. I'm gonna fill up the handle for the most part, and then we'll put the knife together. That's really good. I want the epoxy to run out the front. Putting some pressure on. I'm happy with how much is coming out the front there. I'll go ahead and take this tape off the back and let some come out the back as well. Go ahead and add the pommel nut. I put a bunch of Vaseline around the outside of the pommel nut and some inside on the threads as well. I just finished sanding all the fittings to 600 grit. Since these fittings are Damascus, I want to harden them and temper them the same as the blade. The reason for that is because they'll etch better when they're hardened. Because our pieces are mostly finished, I don't want them to form scale when we go to heat treat them. So I'm gonna use some Brownell's anti-scaling compound.
To begin with, I just heat the parts up to a couple hundred degrees and then apply the Brownell's anti-scaling compound. Then I continue heating the parts up until they're a nice orange color and quench them quickly in my quenching oil right next to me. I'm gonna repeat that process for each part, being extra careful to make sure each one is coated with the anti-scaling compound so we don't get any scale, and to make sure that I don't accidentally overheat the part or I'll melt my gold out. To harden the fittings properly, I need to heat them up to 1500 degrees, but the 24 karat gold melts at 1947 degrees. That is a couple 100-degree window, so I should be good, but I am just going by eye, so I need to be very careful not to melt out the gold. The anti-scaling compound gets very bright when I'm heating it up with a torch, so it can throw you off a little bit if you're trying to see the color of the steel itself. You kind of need to take the torch off the part for a second, let your eyes focus and dilate, and get a truer sense of the color of the steel. That's also why you see me wearing these shaded glasses, is because the anti-scaling compound gets so bright that it's a little overwhelming.
Got all the pieces hardened, and now I've got them on the turkey fryer burner in some water, and we're gonna boil the water, and that should remove the excess anti-scaling compound. Sometimes it all chips off, sometimes it kind of sticks on there.
After hardening the fittings, I did a little bit more hand sanding on them, etched them in a ferric chloride solution, and now we're gonna begin the process of gun bluing the fittings. The key to good bluing is clean parts. I start with Dawn dish soap and running water to get the big stuff, and then move on to an ultrasonic machine with chemical cleaner in it. Then I get the parts in the bluing salt solution. After the bluing's done, I submerge the parts overnight in water displacing oil, and then clean the parts off the next day to see how the bluing looks. The blued finish on these Damascus fittings came out amazing.
I just finished hand sanding this massive 14-inch blade. That took a while. It's all ready to go. It's time to reveal the Damascus pattern. This thing's got really cool mosaic Damascus that it's made of, but we can't see it yet until we do our etching and coffee darkening. It's been a few minutes. Let's take a look at the blade. Whoa, look at that. That is so cool. Look at all those tight W's surrounded by large areas of 1084. Oh, I love it. That's gonna be so cool finished out. I just finished the last etching cycle on the blade. Now I'm gonna get it in a really strong batch of instant coffee to hopefully set in some nice black oxides onto our 1084.
After leaving the blade in the instant coffee for 8 hours, I took the blade out, dried it off, and let it set overnight. Next, I'm gonna add a protective coating of wax to the blade. This will make the pattern in the blade pop a little bit more and, like I said, add a protective coating.
Things are done. There's one more thing I have to do before I can put the knife together. Sharpen the blade.
The broad bed sharpener made short work of this massive blade. You want to level up your knife making? Then check out learnknifemaking.com, where I teach you from start to finish how to make high quality, beautiful knives. If you want to learn from me, then now's the time. All of our online courses are 40% off from now until Christmas. So buy a course today and learn the skills you need to make better knives.
And there it is. This massive 14-inch Bowie is complete. I love the Damascus fittings, and instead of leaving them the same like etched color that the blade is, having the Damascus fittings gun blued so they're nice and black really looks cool. I love the finish on the gold too. Having that burnished finish on there is different than anything I've ever done before. It gives the gold a really raw, natural yellow tone. Instead of having it super highly polished, having all those little tiny burnished marks really just give it a little sparkle. It's hard to put words around what it does to it. I absolutely love this Bowie. This is probably the best coffee darken finish I've ever done. It went so smoothly on this one. I got it the first try. We've got the nice durable wax finish over it that just came out really gorgeous. This knife also probably has one of my favorite clamshell guards I've ever done, and I kept each one of the little clamshell scallops a little bit larger than I normally do on a guard, and I think it looks really good. I love the twisted Damascus guard, the pattern in it, and the twist Damascus on the pommel looks really cool. And then I love how I decided to use the mosaic Damascus from the blade, untwisted, on the pommel and the front spacer. From the side view, on the front spacer and pommel, we get nice straight lines. And then if you look at the pommel on the very end, you have the same mosaic pattern that's on the blade. Seeing this knife finished and come out so closely to what I was picturing in my mind when I first started is so rewarding. It's so cool to be able to actually spend time creating something like this and having your vision come to life into a real object. So no matter what you're creating, I hope you're inspired to get out there and make something really cool with your hands. I will see you in the next video. May the forge be with you. Bye-bye.
Level up your knife making with our online knife making courses only at learnknifemaking.com.